Hello, gang. We're back again with the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. Pandemic may be somewhat over, but the book club continues. And we've got a great guest here today. We got Larry Kirwan, an accomplished musician, writer. He's a radio show host. I mean, he's going to put me to shame here, but you guys may know him a little bit from back in the day. He was frontman, lead guy for Black 47, great band. He's done a number of great books. This is the most recent one, which I highly recommend. Rockaway Blue. Yes, it's great. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because it actually, has some baseball in it. And he also is the host of Celtic Crush, which is on SiriusXM, which we'll get into a bit. Oh, Larry, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Away we go. Okay, question number one. We got incoming. So you're from Wexford, Ireland. How does a guy from Wexford, Ireland, become a rabid baseball fan, especially of the Mets as you are? What's the backstory? What takes us from A to B?
Well, when I got here in the early to mid 70s, it was still a neighborhood bar culture. And you went to your neighborhood bar. And I happened to be living in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn at the time. And there were all Mets fans there. And the television was always on, especially when the Mets were playing. So I became a fan of the Mets, I would say, more by osmosis, just by being there. And, over a period of time, you get to understand the rules of it just by being around it. And that was really it. But I didn't go to see the Mets for the longest time because when we do excursions to baseball games, we always went up to Yankee Stadium. Okay. And that was really interesting because we used to get the cheapest tickets and go way up in the back and drink beer and smoke joints up there.
Sounds like some of the crowd that's still there right now.
Yeah, that was my introduction to baseball, and why I liked it, because it went pretty slow and you could be thinking about other things and all of a sudden there'd be excitement and then back down to the doldrums again. And that suited me. I like that in baseball.
It reminds me of my mother, for example, was not a big baseball fan. We had hockey season tickets. This is outside of Buffalo where I grew up. And I finally took her to a game only about 15 years ago. And she's sitting there and she's revved up. She's ready for like football mode or hockey mode or something. And finally about the third inning, she kind of goes to me and says, "I get it now." And I go, "What do you get, Mom?" And she goes, "We're going to sit around and we're going to talk. We're going to have some beers. And we're going to see what's going on the field." And I'm going, "That's it. That's baseball. You've got it now."
Yeah, it's relaxing because I grew up on soccer and Gaelic athletic sports, which were hurling and football. And they were all, the Gaelic games were all done in an hour. And the soccer was 90 minutes.
Yep.
So to go to a baseball game was a commitment.
Especially these days with the games getting longer and longer. So a Mets fan, okay, I got the Bay Ridge connection here a little bit, but why not the Yankees? I mean, you're going to Yankee games, yet you've remained a Mets fan.
I guess, you start with it, and like I'm a Manchester United fan in soccer, and I hate them now, but I can't give them up. I've been a fan all my life. And with the Mets, it became a thing in New York. I think also there was a class thing in it, that the Mets fans tend to be more a working class, lower middle class, and Yankee fans tend to be more with upper class, not upper classes, but you had to have money to go there.
You had the ka-ching.
Yeah, and there's a difference between the Mets and the Yankees. That if the Yankees are losing around the seventh inning stretch, if they're losing by any amount, the people tend to clear out. The Mets are there to the end because you paid your money and you're gonna enjoy it one way or the other. So
That's
I
right. We
think
got to have another beer. Well, we can get through these innings.
it's something to complain about. There's always wait till next year. Yeah.
That's right. Favorite players from the Mets, and we're talking kind of what era? What are we talking? Seaver, Choo-Choo Coleman? I don't know.
I like Seaver, but he was a little before my time. Before I really got into it, I really got into it around the Keith Hernandez days. You know, with that particular team, Rusty Staub and Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry. There was a real glamour about New York. The Mets ruled New York at that point. The Yankees were in abeyance, and we let them know.
Plus, those guys you just mentioned, they're kind of renegades. I mean, they weren't taking any prisoners when it came to even off the field stuff. They were having fun.
Yeah, and I had another connection too, an odd one, in that my first cousin, Charlie Curfeld, was a reliever for the Astros at that particular period. So I had this awful clash. You know, I'm rooting for Charlie, and then they're playing the Mets in the playoffs or whatever it was at the time. And it was just horrible, you know. I was for Charlie, but at the same time, I was kind of relieved when the Mets won.
Right. That was a great series, Astros and the Mets. That was good. Do you get to games today? I mean, do you still listening on the radio, TV? I mean, what's your relationship with the game right now?
I find I'm writing so much these days, and life seems to be going a lot faster or whatever, that, you know, I'll break off sometimes. I'm watching an inning of the Mets, and I go once a year, maybe to Shea.
Yeah.
Not to Shea, to Citi Field.
To Citi Field, right. The city now. Yeah.
And I occasionally go because my two sons are Yankees fans, which is a rough one.
How did that happen?
Well, you know, they got into it when the Yankees were really happening, you know, and every kid in New York was into the Yankees at that point, you know. But then I had the connection with the Mets too, that Black 47 was huge out in that area. And so we played Irish Night, I think 4 or 5 times, which was kind of an amazing thing because this is in Shea Stadium, although we played in Citi Field too. So you were playing in the exact place that the Beatles had played.
Yes.
On the field there. And it was just an amazing feeling to play to all those Mets fans. And they were Black 47 fans too. So the two things, you know, they merged together.
Yeah. Did they have to take you away in an armored car like they did for the Beatles last couple of shows because they were so popular, or they just let you leave?
We just strolled out and got on the subway like everyone else.
They were busking on the platform or something on the way home. You just mentioned speed. You know, your life's hectic. I mean, you got the Broadway show, which we're going to talk about in a minute. I mean, we got the new novel out, which I'm going to hold up again. This is great, guys. You got to get it. Is baseball a little too slow for what the world is right now? I mean, is it tough to click into baseball? And do you fear, you know, you say your sons are Yankee fans. It's, you know, good your sons are baseball fans, but do you fear that baseball down the road may be too slow for its own good?
You know, the attention span is just so small these days. I do fear for it. But there's one thing I was just thinking that could be the savior of baseball, in that marijuana is becoming legal. And it's
we going back up to the upper rows again, Larry?
It's a perfect game to be high on, just sitting back on a sunny afternoon out in Citi Field or something and whipping a big one. You know, I'm only half joking in this. I think that could be kind of the savior for it.
Oh, well.
I'm sure the commissioner would love to hear that.
Well, I don't know. They're always into making money. It's funny because I've asked that, you know, that crystal ball question a little bit from some other folks, and we haven't gone in that direction ever, but you might be onto something. Oh, now you're, as you said, you're a very prolific guy. You've always got a number of projects going between the music, Black 47, most really the new show with Paradise Square, which we'll talk about, the novel, which I'll hold up one more time. Here we go. And, but there are some great scenes, baseball scenes in Rockaway, even though it's kind of it's post 9/11. That's kind of the impetus, the major event with it all. Would you love to read like a passage from it?
Yeah, but you know something? I was going to do this downstairs. Could I just run downstairs and get the book?
Oh, sure. Go for it. Or maybe, yeah, well, no, go for it. We'll edit that out.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Sounds
I'll be
good.
right back.
All right. While Larry's gone, maybe I'll light up a joint. No, I haven't done that in a long time, so maybe I won't. So sorry about that, gang. No, it's this is a great book, by the way. So there it is. I like the cover. There we go. There's the cover. We have that cover, and we have my cover too. So yeah, Larry's doing great. We've caught up with him in Milford, Connecticut today, and he has a number of places around. And here he comes back now, and I've been holding up the book and kind of I was gonna read a passage too, but back to you.
Yeah. Well, just to give an account, a little bit of backdrop into the story. The book is set 3 years after 9/11, and it concerns a family in Rockaway in Queens, part of New York City. The Murphy family, the father, Jimmy, is a detective sergeant in the NYPD. He has two sons, Brian and Kevin, and a wife, Maggie. And everything's going pretty fine in the family. Brian, the eldest son, has always been brilliant. And he goes to Georgetown and graduates top of his class, and then he joins the cops, which nobody can believe. And he moves up really quickly there and becomes a lieutenant at 30. And then disaster strikes, 9/11. He is a hero, as is the way he is, and generally runs in, saves 7 people, and then unaccountably runs back in again. And the North Tower collapses on him. And 2 years later, the family is beginning to come back together, and Jimmy finds out that his son was actually in the North Tower 30 minutes before the plane struck. So what was he doing there? And he suspects a cover-up, and sure enough, he finds out there is a cover-up. And now he's faced with the dilemma, because his wife, who took this really badly, is getting better, but if he finds out something about Brian that's not great, then it might set her back into depression again. So he is thinking back on all the different things, and he remembers a game between the Mets and the Yankees. And Brian, the son, is a Mets fan, and the father is a Yankees fan. And here's the father thinking about this particular game. Was the Piazza Clemens confrontation the first time Jimmy noticed that Brian was skating on a hairline crack? That nail-biting October night back in 2000 up the stadium, what was eating his eldest son? The whole city was going crazy. A Subway series. The Yanks were a game up. The 3 of them, father and the 2 sons, with good seats, tossing down beers. Brian had a hip flask of Black Bushmills in his pocket and had flashed his badge on the way in. Who was going to search a lieutenant? Yankees and Mets fans all mixed up together in the crowd, for the most part enjoying each other and the crosstown rivalry, knowing they were a part of history, proud of themselves. How many cities could boast one great team? New Yorkers had 2, and that night they were playing for number 1. Brian was still flushed from making lieutenant. The whole peninsula was talking about him. Guys on the job congratulating Jimmy. Your son's going all the way. Already, Brian had 2 or 3 pictures taken with Giuliani, flying down to DC for conferences, doing cop things Jimmy had never even heard of, let alone accomplished. He was proud of his boy, and it didn't trouble him that he wouldn't make it to the same level. Or did it? The ballpark was electric. The rocket was on the mound, pawing the earth like a big Lone Star bull. You could almost see the steam coming out of his nostrils, the spittle at the corners of his mouth. What inning was it? Early in the game, Piazza's first at bat, on already so much bad blood between them. Clemens had beamed Piazza some months earlier, concussing him so badly he had to miss the All-Star game. This was the confrontation every baseball fan in the country had been waiting for. The whole stadium could feel something coming. The rocket, raging, juiced to the nines. Pennsylvania Piazza, calm as ever on the outside. But you knew every nerve end was twitching deep inside, that he'd give it all up for one big mighty swing for the rafters, rock Clemens' world and send baseball's biggest bully staggering all the way back to Texas. Brian was talking up a storm, how Piazza was the greatest hitting catcher ever, and that this night would be poetry in motion. He'd been joshing with a group of lit-up Yankee fans in front of him. Jimmy's antenna had risen. One of the Yank guys in a Clemens shirt had become surly and was giving back way more than was called for. Brian wasn't paying him much attention. As Piazza stepped into the box, he had passed the flask around once already and took another deep swig for good luck. And then Clemens threw one straight down the middle in the high 90s, and Piazza swung for the fences. Ball and bat collided, and the crack resounded throughout the crowded canyons. The bat splintered. Ball and wood careened outward. While Piazza lumbered towards first base, the rocket was dazed and confused as a piece of wood flew at him. He picked up the handle and flung it at Piazza. Brian was instantly on his feet, screaming, as was the whole stadium. The guy in the Clemens shirt was howling, "Piazza's a fag! Piazza's a fag!" Then from out of nowhere, Brian hauled him back over the seats, had him by the throat, and was choking him. Jimmy and Kevin were trying to peel him off. Then Brian shook them loose and headed towards the field, and Clemens, before he was dragged down by 2 security men. Jimmy and Kevin tried to rescue him, and everyone in their area was staring and pointing, and then the 3 of them were being escorted out and badges were being flashed until a couple of cops stepped in and stroked the feathers of the offended security detail, and within minutes, they were down the street at stands, tossing back more beers and soothing tempers, and wondering what the hell had happened. Why hadn't Jimmy understood then that his son needed help, that he was at a breaking point, wrestling with something way bigger than himself? But that was Brian. The big gesture that disguised so much else. Beat up the rocket, build a fancy spread down in Breezy Point, or run back into that collapsing nightmare of the North Tower, fully convinced he'd make it out. I need a drink after that.
Yeah, really. Oh no. I need a couple drinks. That's great. And I think, obviously a lot of baseball fans remember that moment. It's interesting, so cool that you took that real life incident and then made it, such a big part of the novel. That's really, really good. Paradise Square is now on Broadway. Tell us a little bit about that. And, doesn't necessarily have to be a baseball connection, but that's your latest thing. And, just tell people a bit about that if they're coming through New York next time, maybe like me, and we'll check it out.
Well, Paradise Square began about 11 years ago as a smaller musical called Hard Times. And it got picked up by a famous producer, Gart Drabinsky, and we ran it in Berkeley, in California, and then in Chicago, where it was a hit in both places. And now it's up on Broadway and running in New York. We recently had to close it down because of COVID, but it's back up and running again. It basically is a story of immigration, kind of like myself. And when the Irish people came here in big numbers during the famine years beginning in 1845, they poured into an area called the Five Points in Lower Manhattan. And the Five Points was pretty much an African-American area at that time. The African-American dance halls were there, and the African-Americans were the only ones who accepted the Irish in and allowed them to live with them, welcomed them into the dance halls, even when Irish who had come before didn't want anything to do with these famine Irish. So it's about this period from 1845 until the draft riots in 1863, when the Irish and African Americans amalgamated. Many of them got married to each other, had children, and they created a new culture by their dancing and the competitions between their champions. They created tap dancing.
Oh,
They
wow.
also created a whole new variety of music by mixing the African American rhythms with the Irish melodies. And then on the night of July 13th, 1863, there were riots throughout New York City. It was the biggest civil conflagration up until that point. And many of the amalgamationists who were born in that period had to leave the city. A certain amount of Black men were lynched at the time, and the two sides went back to their own cultures. And this was something that I came upon when I came over here. And it just through hearing about it, hearing little echoes of the culture that had been created. And I thought it's a great subject for a musical. So now it's on Broadway.
Wow. Congratulations. You know, it's you bring up the draft rights of 1863. I touched on that just a smidge when you had the riots in Detroit. You know, one of my books, Summer of '68, is about that ball team, the Tigers, that kind of saves the city, so to speak, from rioting again. And it was interesting because in doing the research with that, I think it was Hampton Sides who had done some stuff on Martin Luther King, you know, kind of said, you know, you got to check out, you know, these are the worst riots, the ones in Detroit since 1863, you know, in the US. And it's funny how sports and stuff can kind of, you know, come in at times and can quell it. It can even flare it up a little bit. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I think some people like to pigeonhole everything. I think, you know, I don't want to speak for you totally, but, you know, I think you and I like the swirl, you know, how things can kind of, you know, impact other things, you know, whether it's music or sports or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I was always very political. I grew up in Ireland in a time when the civil rights was happening in the north of Ireland, but we got the idea for civil rights in Ireland through Black civil rights. And you know, there's a direct link between them. Up until recently, after he died, the most popular person in Belfast, most popular American, was John Lewis.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
Because they recognized there was a man that crossed a bridge, got beaten up for it, and still had his hopes for his people and everything. And Northern Irish nationalists and Catholics could totally identify with a man like him.
No, he was an incredible guy. Let's tease out the swirl a little bit. I'm kind of riffing, but since April 2005, you've had this very popular show, on SiriusXM entitled Celtic Crush. It's on the Loft. I'm one of the loyal listeners. I've gotten sucked in over the years. SiriusXM also carries, obviously, the baseball broadcasts. Have you seen any kind of interesting crossover at times? I imagine you probably listen to the Mets broadcasts on SiriusXM, but anything else where Celtic Crush is kind of swirled in with sports or swirled in with baseball, or just become kind of part of that world? Have you ever done a whole show on Celtic Crush on the Mets? I doubt it, but I'll be listening this Sunday to see if it is.
I don't like to hoist all the misfortune of the Mets on the rest of the country. We're kind of immune to it at this point. It's like, God, the Mets are doing well. Yeah. People bring up baseball a lot, but yeah, baseball and soccer, I would say, are the two things that come out sports-wise on Celtic Crush. I suppose because I'm the only one talking. I'm talking about the Mets and Manchester United.
Yeah, but the roots are deep with both of those sports.
Yeah, they're very deep, and they stand for something. As I was saying about the Mets, I wouldn't say the Mets were a lower class team, but the Yankees were just so big and beyond everything, and kind of ignored us. The pesky neighbors from Queens kind of that beat us every now and again. But yeah, the Mets stood for something in New York, and I like to bring that up because we're an immigrant culture here, and there's always problems with immigrants being allowed into the country, and especially so in the last 12 years or something like that. And, we need immigrants to refresh the blood and everything. And that's not happening right now. And I think the fracturing in the country has to do a lot with the fact that we're not getting this inflow of immigrants who are changing things around us all the time. It's happening, you just come to New York and you get in a taxi. You can tell who the recent immigrants are, or whoever's driving for Uber, you can tell. And I'm just all in favor of immigrants, and I feel that baseball is a place that immigrants learn about American culture. And just by going to the games, you're accepted as someone there, you're supporting your team. And it was the same way with soccer in England, the very same thing. But there's that factor of immigration, that the acceptance of all sorts of people in to shout for their team is really important.
Oh, that's a good point. Sometimes I speak to Fortune 500 companies, and they are watching sometimes the immigration of baseball, and it comes out in questions like, okay, why is this team doing well and why is that team not doing well? And it actually, I think, comes down to, especially when the Latino factor became huge out of Dominican Republic, Venezuela before the troubles there, Cuba before then. It took something more. You couldn't just go out and recruit and sign some player because you saw him playing on some sugarcane plantation. You then had to make sure the talent rose. You had to make sure it excelled. And I still remember going to Dominican Republic on a trip, and we came around the corner. We'd pretty much been in the jungle, and all of a sudden here were this, kind of dormitories that looked like a Holiday Inn Express that you'd see outside of Denver or something. And I was just agog. And then the people running the team just said, no, we only have so many chances when we decide, it's going to be Larry Kirwan and Tim Wendel, the guys that are going to go up. We want to make sure they succeed. And we don't want the culture to be so much of a shock that they don't know how to order food. They don't know how to check into a Holiday Inn Select, et cetera. And I think some of the teams, the Mets are one of them, have done a very good job I guess, internal immigration to a certain extent, and making sure their prospects, as best they can, pan out.
Yeah, and speaking of Cuba, I went down to Cuba about 3 years ago, and it was just a great place to visit. But one of the things that would endear you to the people there was knowing about Cuban players playing with the Mets or playing with whomever, and instantly there was no problems.
Mm-hmm.
The walls, any political walls, broke down instantly through baseball. That it was a feel-good factor about baseball that appealed to the Cuban people and it appealed to us going in and just being able to talk, having
Yeah.
something totally in common.
Yeah, there's that connection that again, that root that goes deep. It's funny. I when I'm down, you've been down more recently than me, but sometimes I'll will always bring a half dozen baseballs and shove them in my knapsack going around town.
Oh,
and when
yeah.
I see kids playing, and usually they're playing with like pieces of duct tape or something.
Yeah.
That's not a ball. That would even work with Willie Mays playing stickball. But I'll give it to them. And sometimes I get the most amazed looks. It's like I'm giving somebody the Hope Diamond. It's like, here, have a baseball. And they instantly know it because there's a connection. All right, back to the Mets. They're off. Even though I didn't look at the standings today, I may be walking right into this a little bit. They're off to a great start.
They won last night. Yeah. So
do you
I think
believe?
we're 12-5 now.
Yeah, and looking good. I mean, you feeling good about this? Do you believe, or where are you at?
Yeah, I totally believe. You gotta believe. You gotta believe. But I'm that way about life in general because I just came from dealing or just came from writing to do this, and I have a new show that I'm working on. It's done. It's about Iraq and about the war and dealing it through the eyes of a number of people. And sometimes I'm looking at it thinking, well, people want to see this, and I think, yeah, of course, because it's about humanity, and you've got to have that. You got to believe factor always, because otherwise you do nothing. It was the same with Black 47 when it started. We went up to the Bronx and everyone hated us nonstop. It was like, get the hell out. We got fired every night, but we believed that what we were doing was really good. And after about 3 to 6 months, we were happening in New York. Within a year, we were the band in New York. So if you don't have the you gotta believe thing, you're just missing out so much on life. And maybe that's why I'm a Mets fan, because you gotta believe every year. You gotta say in October, wait till next year. That's a big part of the book. At the end of it, the father is talking to the son who's alive, to Kevin. Jimmy is talking to Kevin, and the Mets, the son, the grandson, Brian's grandson, wants to go to Shea Stadium. And they're saying, no, we want to go up to see the Yanks. And he really wants to go because he wants to be following the footsteps of his father. And they look at each other and say, yeah, one thing, we miss so much about Brian, but one thing I really miss is wait till next year.
That's great. Well, you talk about believing. I'm flashing on long time ago. We got the Cuba thing going on a little bit too, but Orestes Minnie Minoso. I never called him Minnie. I always called him Orestes. And he was like the first prominent, dark-skinned athlete in Chicago, and really got called out for it, and I asked him one time, how'd you put up with all this? Even getting the name Minnie, which is somewhat feminine. He woke up one day and looked in the paper. They're calling me Minnie. What's this about? And but he gave this most eloquent answer. He said, it's like you're, I think he compared it to an opera singer, but you could be any type of performer. He said, the curtains, part, and you're out there on the stage and you start to do what you're going to do. In his case, it was baseball, but in your case, it'd be performing, the Bronx, whatever. And they don't like it. They start to boo, they may start giving you a hard time. And he had this most amazing answer. He said, what do you do then? And he said, you don't stop, you continue to sing. And he did, he just sang with his bat. And you certainly did with putting Black 47 on the mat. And, at some point you have no choice. You got to go ahead and do it regardless of what the odds may be.
Yeah, we did that with Black 47 right through. It didn't matter where we were going on stage before anyone. We always felt we were in control of your own destiny. That, all right, you're opening for someone. I remember one time opening for the Pogues in London. We were only going about 9-10 months at a time. And we played in these really rough bars in the Bronx where you could actually get beaten up. There was no security or anything, and yet we were as arrogant as all hell. It was like, you're going to listen to us. That TV is turned off when we play. The lads are watching the game. The lads are here to see us. And the curtain said, they are like hell. But we went on in Brixton Academy in London, and as we were going on stage, the crowd got a chant going, we want the Pogues, we want the Pogues. So I remember thinking, wow, screw you. I went over to my amplifier, turned everything up to 11, I turned all my effects up, and then I hit wham, a big open E chord, and the whole place went, this is that same ending to them. And then I went over and said, good evening, we're Black 47. And then we went straight into it. And I swear to God, so many people have come up to me anytime I'm in London and even in New York saying, I was at that show you guys played and my hearing has never been quite right. So be careful when you're booing someone. There are ways to strike them back.
Always turn up the amplifier. Well, this has been great, Larry, and it's been great talking with you and everything. And yeah, I think we'll tidy this up before I get an E cord in my ears. But just to close, Black 47, have you guys ever done any kind of baseball related songs? Are you going to do something on the Mets, or have you done something on the Mets?
Well, oddly enough, there's a friend of mine who was responsible for getting Hard Times, which is now part of Square off the ground. His name is Peter Ladon, and he is reviving Diamonds, which was a musical in the 80s that Hal Prince directed, and they're going to put new songs in it. And he asked me to write a song about baseball from an Irish perspective. So I guess I'll be using the Mets someplace.
It's coming. All right.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't so far, but.
Oh, very good. Well, again, thank you for your time. I love the swirl of everything. It's always good. And folks, if you aren't listening to the Celtic Crush, do it. If you're in New York, go see Paradise Square. And if you're looking for a good read, find this, get it. So anyway, Larry, thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks so much. And good luck with your own books and your own career. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.